Welcome to Legacy Cast, where we talk about your story, your way, and what are you doing to make sure that people know about you many generations from now. Welcome, Legacy Cast listeners. This is your host, James Snow, and you're here with Legacy Cast, the program where we speak to very interesting individuals all around the world, and we hear from them the things that they're doing in their life so that they can create really a lasting story that lasts beyond many generations. That truly is what a legacy is and should be, is you telling your story your way so that other people know that not only that you lived, but what you cared about, what you were passionate about, what you involved yourself with, and most importantly, how you changed other people's lives. I have with me today Frazer Rice. He's my guest here and enjoying the island of Nantucket at the moment. He was telling me just before he came on, so I'm sitting here with much envy. But welcome to the program, Frazer.
Thank you very much, James. It's great to appear.
And as the name of the program implies, with Legacy Cast, we do talk about people's legacy, what they're doing, really. And so when you hear, Frazer, what about a legacy, what's the thing that comes to mind for you?
Sure. So maybe what I'll do is I'll give a quick little background on what I do. I tend to help wealthy clients, help them understand what their needs are and to plan their wealth so that they're able to do what they want to do in life. And as you say, talk about their legacy. One of the things that is usually on the forefront of many wealthy people's minds is what their legacy is going to be, what they're going to hand down to their kids, what they're going to do for their philanthropies and their charities, and how they want to be remembered going forward. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that and trying to make sure that they have the resources and the capabilities to do what they want to do on that front.
Sure. And we both, Frazer, are kind of in the same space in the financial sector. And so, what that means in a lot of ways is just, kind of giving your legacy some legs so that it has the way to carry forward whatever your wishes are. It's putting the vehicles in place that, are able to really give you the momentum behind that, as it were.
Right. And so one way to think about it for me anyway is for me to help people try to endow the causes that they support. At the minimum level, that can be talking about sort of endowing a trust or a structure that makes sure that the family is taken care of, spouse, kids, grandkids, and beyond. Other times, people want to endow a cause or a charity or a collection. Sometimes people have a collection of cars or horses or buildings or libraries or something like that they want to push forward well into the future beyond their lifetime.
Yeah, and it's important to mention that, many people, as you're mentioning the animals, for example, many people are very passionate about animals. Their dogs, cats, birds, horses, as you mentioned, different things of that sort. So, yeah. It's an area that a lot of people don't really think about is, what if, that proverbial what if.
Yeah, the imagination is really the only thing that limits you as it relates to what you want to endow or provide funding for. People try to set their pets up. They try to set up lots of other types of situations, whether it's related to collections, compounds, things like that, and we try to help out where possible.
Sure. So obviously, with what we're kind of discussing so far, you would say then it's an important consideration for people to really invest some serious mental energy and some emotional energy in kind of stepping away from their day-to-day grind and thinking about those considerations. What are they going to do? And what should they do? Is that correct?
Absolutely. There's sort of two parts to it. I think the technical part, which I would describe as getting the money ready for the family, that's when you're doing a lot of estate planning, a lot of structuring, titling of assets, et cetera, sort of the dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Many times, though, that many of the things that you're trying to do when you implement those technical components, to do that without getting the family ready for the money, instead of getting the money ready for the family, sometimes you can really put yourself at cross purposes. And to invest the time to understand what the family's needs are, what your philanthropy's needs are, more importantly, to make sure that they understand why you're doing it, why you as a family are doing it, why you as a person are doing it. If you don't have that in place, sometimes you can set yourself up for future conflict, and all that good work that you do on the technical side can go awry.
Yeah, you're spot on, because it's something, especially when I'm sitting down with people, is I definitely want all family members that are going to have a say in the process to be present. Sometimes every time it really is, there's going to be that spouse needs to be there, but sometimes there's going to be bring the children in, because they have a vested interest in the overall scheme, because maybe they're in sports, or they're in music programs, or what have you. They have their extracurricular activities, which do have a bearing on what the overall picture looks like.
Absolutely. And I have a good exercise for that in a gentle way, especially if you're trying to get people to understand what philanthropic goals are like. If you have $4 and 3 kids, one thing that I think is an interesting exercise is to have each of the kids give $1, so that everyone has an understanding of what's important to them. And then that fourth dollar, to be able to have the kids give that jointly, meaning they have to get together and come up with a cause that they agree upon and give that money as a joint gift. Accomplishes a few things. Number one, you get the point of what's important to people individually, but then you also get some shared decision making and some idea of how the kids interact with each other. And then ultimately, when they make that donation, the kids know more about what they know about they know more about themselves, and then you know more about what makes them tick. And so as you're doing some of the other planning going forward, those are good data points for you to use, and the understanding of what you're doing from a legacy standpoint and some of the values you're trying to transmit, that should transfer to the kids as well. So now it's a useful sort of silly exercise, but it's not that silly. It actually transmits a lot of value, both downward to the kids and back upward to the parents.
And obviously that does need to begin at the house, because those things may or may not be taught in the school environment, and so those lessons need to come from the parents, because you can't guarantee it's coming from somewhere else. And so your values in that area, from what I've seen, those values should be determined by the parental structure.
No question about it. And from a parental structure, I think one thing that's useful in sort of putting together estate plans and money plans and so on, and when you're trying to effectuate the transfer of values to the next generation, it's important for the spouses to be on the same page on that front, so that you don't have mixed signals. And so that communication not only begins from the parents to the kids, but it's, between the parents and the parents. I agree with you. I think you can't rely on other systems to do that for you. You're just not around it enough, and you don't have enough control.
Oh, that's very true. Now, looking at it, since you are obviously a business person, if you're looking at your specific legacy, how would you correlate that into what you're doing from a business standpoint?
Well, I think the real key for me is, from the business standpoint, obviously like to make money, like to live well, try to do right by myself and set myself up to retire nicely and take care of the people that I care about. But what makes me get up in the morning, and what really is nice for me, is when I work with clients and I help them to transmit their legacies. In a sense, while I am sort of this charities and the way I give up my time and so on, by intersecting those types of values and helping my clients get where they want to go, I feel like I'm having a nice sort of geometric impact on people. If I can affect 5 or 10 or 20 or 70 families and help them push out their values a little bit further, that's a big legacy that I may never see in particular, but that is an impact that I can have. And if that intersects in a way that's good for business, that's doubly good, and it just sort of feeds upon itself.
Do you personally have children? And if so, are they looking at maybe wanting to take over your particular business, or are they looking in a different direction?
No kids. My sister has a 4-year-old niece and a recent nephew. He's only about 2 months old now. And so it's too early for them to go into the wealth management business, I think. I'd rather have them try out a bunch of other things. But what I did do when I wrote my book, which is called Wealth Actually, I dedicated it to my niece, and in a sense, all young people who are facing a lot of these issues. I tried to congeal a lot of what I've learned in wealth management and law and politics and some of my other parts of my background into one form, so that people could learn how to. Maybe they had a book that they could read that helped them think about wealth and how to make good decisions around it. And I'm hoping that that's part of the legacy I leave, is that I've got something tangible that people can read and they can get the benefit of my experience and hopefully avoid a lot of mistakes that either I've made or that I've seen made in my practice over the last 15 plus years.
Yeah, and as I always tell people, the best mistakes to learn from is somebody else's. So by all means, listen to other people and have those mentors tell you what they did in the process. And in this case, reading a book like yours on Wealth Actually is learning from what your experience was, so that they don't have to necessarily have those same mistakes.
Somebody once said that reading books is terrific because you get one person's lifetime of experience in about 4 hours worth of reading. And if you read widely, you're getting a lot of different experiences, as you said, and
Sure.
if the books are good, and I hope mine is, and I hope other people's are as well. But if they're good, you're picking up good experiences, and you're able to the extent you can or want to, incorporate them in your life. And again, I talk about avoiding rookie mistakes, and
Sure.
if it gets you from A to Z a little bit faster and without much conflict or that many speed bumps, it just makes you that more efficient. And you can go further into your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true, very true. If you're thinking about your business and its future, obviously you have more of a planning mindset because of being in the wealth management industry. But if you're thinking about its future, are there particular things that still keep you up at night, even though you do have the background of how to plan against those things?
Sure. Well, a lot of things keep me up at night about it. I think the first one in particular, I think the business model around wealth management is under significant review, generally speaking. I think that the costs are coming down in terms of investment implementation. Fidelity has just announced its first 0 basis point fee ETF for the world market. And so it's very difficult to fight free. So when you're in the wealth management space and you're charging a fee for planning and for advice and for service, you have to really provide that. And I think a lot of business models that really worked 10, 15, 20 years ago, those firms that still operate under those thoughts, I think that's under severe review. And I think the clients expect a lot, and rightfully so, for the dollar that they pay to an advisor. And so, from a business model standpoint, I think that's something that keeps me up at night. The second one, and it doesn't keep me up at night personally, but I worry about it from an industry standpoint, is the word fiduciary. I come from a legal background. I was a lawyer, and so I'm used to the concept of you'd better do right by your clients, or it's going to end up really badly for you. The wealth management and the investment industry struggle with it, and that word means different things to different people. And ultimately, I think the really good advisors who put their clients' interests first are going to rise to the top. I think those that don't or strictly sell products, I think they're going to suffer longer term. And so I think the industry has to really come to grips with that word and get some real boundaries and guardrails around it, so that everyone's working from the same playbook.
Sure. And for our listeners, just to kind of, sum some of that jargon up, is effectively when you're looking for someone to work with, someone to be your trusted advisor, the answer to the question of, are you a fiduciary, should always be a yes. If they say that, then you know that you're going to be in a better position. And if they say no, then perhaps that's something you should consider, and put a lot of thought into that, because that really is going to differentiate which side of the table people are coming from.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, I think if they're able to answer the yes to the word, to the question, are you a fiduciary? The answer is, are you paid to put my interests first? And that way, their interests are aligned with your interests. And I think that's the start of a harmonious business relationship. And that also ensures that you get the best advice possible.
Right. And, obviously, good education is something that we all in our industry want to give people. Is we want to educate you on what the ups and downs, ins and outs are of this stuff. And, the more you're educated, the more value we're able to provide you, because then you have some of that information too. Do you believe it's important then, as far as from a personal life standpoint as well as business, that people create some sort of strategy? This is kind of a no-brainer question, but do you feel like people should put something together and maybe stick to it on a weekly basis?
Sure. So, I'll start from the top. I think hope is not a strategy. So, if you say everything's going to be okay and my job's always going to be there, you may be in for a rude awakening. If only because laws change, economics change. Job places change, and life events change. You could become disabled, that type of thing. So I would say that putting some strategy around your life is always a good idea from a long-term perspective. I would say strictly from an estate planning perspective, the idea of making sure you have a will and healthcare proxy and living trust if appropriate, those types of things, that's standard, and you should do it, especially if you have a family. I would also think that the idea of having an investment strategy is a good idea. I think taking some time to figure out where you are currently, what your situation is as it relates to your costs, whether you have any debt, and what your goals are going forward. I think getting that written down and thought about is important, because if you don't write it down and think about it, you have nothing to check against, and you could waste a lot of time, and more importantly, make a lot of poor decisions going forward as to how to invest proceeds, or whether you take one job versus another, or whether you borrow money to do this, that, or the other thing. If you don't have a longer time horizon in mind and a longer framework of goals in mind, then I think you're setting yourself up for a potential problem. As it relates to something that you look at weekly, I think from a budgeting standpoint and just understanding what you have in your checkbook and how it relates to your expenses and so on, I think that's a weekly or biweekly exercise, monthly at minimum. From an investment standpoint, I guard against people looking at their investments that often, because I would rather have them have a longer term horizon as it relates to their investments. If you're constantly watching CNBC and watching the market go up and down, and is Tesla doing this, that, or the other thing, you can drive yourself crazy. I would much rather have people have a broader, let's call it an investment policy statement, saying this is how I want my proceeds invested. These are the goals for which I'm investing them for. If things start to move in the market, these are the bandwidths upon which I've allocated my assets. If they get too high or too low, I can have them shifted a little bit or adjusted accordingly. I would look at investments for most people. Quarterly would probably be a good look. For those people who are really busy, I think even annually is fine. But if people feel like they really have to be on top of it, I think quarterly is not a problem. And that instills two things. Number one, a little bit of discipline around the structure you've built around your wealth and the investment policy statement. And two, it gets you away from the short-termism and day trading mentality that I think is not very productive for most people.
Yeah, and it can be dangerous, especially if you don't know what you're doing, obviously.
Yeah, it's dangerous. It's dangerous even if you do know what you're doing.
That's true. Very true. Very true. Now, this kind of ties in, when I was mentioning individual and business, is this sounds very much like having a business plan for your family, really, because it's like having that roadmap to know, not only what you're doing today and next week, but 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, is giving yourself a plan that ahead of time where you're headed, so that you're not having to change direction as frequently. You sort of know where the ultimate destination is, and so you're able to make course corrections, but not on a very constant basis.
Right. I completely agree with that. It is a business plan. I think that one of the areas I would think about too is some people chafe when I talk about 1 year, 5 year, 10 years out. And instead they like the idea of framing the timeframes around certain events. And so things like marriages of kids,
right.
College costs, retirement, and then ultimately death and what you're going to do with those assets afterward. To try to chart around that, I think, is another way to do it if you're not comfortable with 5, 10, 15 years. And the nice thing too is that if circumstances change, if there's an untimely death or if there's a divorce or something like that, you can do what you described, course correct and reevaluate what your new issues are. And I think that's the key. I think having a broader structure upon which you go, it helps solve a bunch of different mistakes. And then if something comes up that you didn't plan for, which is inevitable with life, then you're able to deal with it without too much carnage to your personal financial situation.
Yeah, and I love what you point out, correlating it to life events, because that really, for our listeners, is a huge gold nugget of how to strategize. Is looking at it, in a very real life term. It's looking at it, with the emotion involved, because really you're going to be looking at it that way. You're not looking at it in a very impersonal manner. You're looking at it as like you mentioned, Frazer, when your kids get married, or when you're wanting to maybe go from the apartment into an actual house, when maybe you want to plan on getting a new car, when you're planning on perhaps retiring from your job, or stepping away part-time from the job. All those different things that happen in life, those are very key points. And by looking at it in those terms, you're really going to be a lot more invested in your plan, because it's that rule by association, you might say, that when you associate your planning to those events, then you're really more invested in it, I think.
No question about it. In the vernacular of our industry, it's called goals-based investing. And a neat little trick is to set up different pools of money for your different goals. You may not be thinking of it in this way, but having a 401k is, in a sense, setting aside a pool of money for retirement. Well, you can do the same types of things, maybe not as tax advantaged, but the same types of things for other different goals. So if you set up an account for the purpose of a house, or you set up an account for the purpose of one of your kids' weddings, or et cetera, on down the line, that gives you something to siphon money into and invest for, and it keeps your goals organized. You can chart how you're progressing through each of those goals, and then if something happens where you have to make a decision to sacrifice one for another, or if you lose your job and things get a little bit difficult, you see where that is, as opposed to having one big pool of money and then all of a sudden you're overwhelmed by what seem like a lot of different demands that may or may not you may not be able to execute.
Right. So as far as specific roadblocks, we'll go from just advising maybe a young business owner for the moment. Certain business or certain roadblocks that you've seen through your experience in having a practice, what would you warn them against, a new business owner?
Well, so for a new business owner, obviously the new business is the be all end all of the new business owner's experience. To get something up and running and to make it profitable, that's where all the all available resources are probably going, and that's where the attention is. So a roadblock in many ways is for people trying to establish a larger financial plan, is to try to get the new business owner to say, look, you've got to think about things a little bit more long term as well. I'm not saying you take any time away from your business, but for first things first, try to plan a little bit for retirement away from the business so that you have some proceeds available for that. I would try to build a safety net of cash to the extent you can. And as a business owner myself now, and as having advised a bunch of them, I know that that's extremely difficult, but I like the idea of having some safe money, some margin for error in case something goes wrong, Frankly, if you're borrowing money from a bank, they're going to want to see that anyway. That's a big component of it. But I think the other roadblock too, from an attention standpoint, is making sure that they have the structure in place for their families and for the other things that they want to do: wills, living trusts, healthcare proxies. Making sure that those I's are dotted as well, because life can jump out in front of you and make things a little bit difficult. And if you don't have that in place, then you can leave your loved ones in a lot of chaos, and you could cause yourself a lot of different problems as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also, especially when you have employees as well, these considerations from a business owner standpoint, we want to employ that on the behalf of our employees. Make sure that they have the tools available so that they can have the will. The complete will package put together, and they can in turn make sure that their I's are dotted and T's crossed with things such as life insurance or disability protections and what have you. And then even from a business owner standpoint, key person protections, because as a business owner, if something happens to one of your key employees, you're going to have to make sure that you fill that seat, and so that's going to have a financial ramification on your business, and certainly something that you want to address ahead of time rather than later, because if you do it first, then you don't have to reach into that bucket of money that we were talking about to rescue you from a mistake.
James, you make a great point there, that the employees are an unbelievably important constituency in your life, and to treat them well and to be thinking about them in those terms has a couple of really nice points to it. The first one is, A, it's the right thing to do. Sure. B, it's very important to treat them well and to keep them happy and to keep them productive and to keep them safe to the extent you can, because ultimately that reputation will garner really well for your business going forward. And number three, to get back to the legacy component we talked about, if you're able to help make other people's dreams work by virtue of them being employed with you, you're having that geometric impact on legacy going forward. And I'm a big believer in karma on that front, and I think those things spill back to you in a really nice way.
They do for sure. And like you said, it's the right thing to do. And when you do those things, word gets out, and you're going to have loyal employees. And a loyal employee is something you cannot put a dollar figure on, because they will stick with you, in the good times and bad, and they will stick it out, and they know that you care about their family and their life. So, look at it that way, because, again, it's the right thing to do.
Well, and doing the right thing too, just to follow up on that, it creates loyal customers as well. Sure. And it also creates loyal vendors. So that other part where you're using other people, when the word gets out that you have a good reputation for how you treat your employees, your vendors will probably be there for you when times get tough. And your customers, if you get to a point where tie goes to the person or the company that they feel better about, they will stick with you, and that's a nice thing.
Oh, absolutely. So, what are some maybe support and resources that a budding entrepreneur should be looking for? Obviously, there's SCORE that's out there for people to reach into, and Small Business Administration. But what are some additional support resources that you've run across that you might want to, open people's eyes to?
Well, the biggest thing I think that's important is to have a circle of like-minded people around you that you can bounce things off of. I talk a little bit about it in my book on the personal level of having a kitchen cabinet or a cabinet of people that aren't your official advisors that you can bounce things off of. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, I think having a group of other entrepreneurs who are going through the same types of issues, I think that's really good to have, because there are times when it's very lonely out there and you don't have the answers, and you've got a bunch of people looking up to you, hoping that you're providing direction. And there are plenty of people in everybody's communities who are starting businesses and going through different flavors of the same thing that you're going through. I would encourage you to go to those types of scenarios at a broader level, and I guess maybe a bigger company level. There's a thing called YPO, which is the Young Presidents Organization, and I believe that's for people who run companies with I forget the number of employees that they have, but let's call it 100. So for some entrepreneurs, that's probably a little too big, but there are other organizations like that that are around various communities. I would say your Chamber of Commerce would have a good list of people on that front.
Sure,
and
sure.
the idea of being civically minded like that and being a part of that, I think that it's not only good from a support system standpoint, but from a connection standpoint, you never know what sort of associations and joint ventures that might pop up out of it. And ultimately, it could even be joint marketing activities.
Yeah, and mastermind groups is another one that is can be pretty powerful, because in those mastermind groups you are working with very oftentimes business owners that they likewise are in those mastermind groups looking for feedback. It's sort of like like you mentioned, having a board of trustees that you're not having to pay for. So that's kind of nice, and you get the input and experience from all those other people from where they have come and the things that they've gone through.
I would argue too that not just local business groups, but I think even industry groups are worth joining, so that you know what's happening within your industry, and you're seeing people who have exactly the same problems you do, but maybe you're just a little earlier on in the process there. Right. But you're not going to be too far away from someone who may be acquiring your business at that point, and that's there's nothing wrong with that. You can obviously be guarded with what you think is your competitive advantage, but to make connections within the industry, that may be a source of employees for you, that may be a source of capital for you going forward. Anything where you're meeting people who are able to assist you with your problems, or at least provide a little more information for you, that's really nice stuff.
Sure. Now, as far as people incorporating their values and injecting their values into their businesses, we're in a very unique time right now in our society where people are starting, I think, to do a lot more of that, putting their values, their beliefs, even things on a spiritual level into their business. How do you look at that, and how do you do that yourself, one way or the other?
Sure. So I think a couple ways to think about it. The first one is from an investment standpoint, the ESG movement, which is sort of environmental, social, and governance. Investment managers are looking at those qualities in businesses going forward, and they're keeping score as to who does well in those categories. So for people who are injecting values into their business, that's something that investors are keeping track of. That didn't used to be the case, or at the very least it was on a minimal basis, but it's becoming very popular now. So I think the question is particularly well timed, just from an investment standpoint. I think it's out there. I don't want to call it a trend necessarily, but I think it's something that's getting a lot of different focus. For clients and people that I'm around and so on who look at values and how to inject them into their business, usually it starts from a governance standpoint. They define what their mission is. And so obviously for many people, their mission is to either provide service or sell goods and something like that. But it may be to do it in a certain way, or along a certain with a certain set of values attached to it. I'm sure I haven't really run into this specifically, but for we strive to be a Christian company and follow the precepts of the Bible or something like that. That wouldn't surprise me to be a part of some company's mission statement. Google at one point, their mission statement had a component that said "Do no harm," and that is I think a value that they want to have pervade their overall culture. As it relates to the way I go about things, again, I think it comes back to the word fiduciary. I try to make sure that I do right by my clients and by the people that I deal with to the extent that I possibly can. And in a sense, I don't quantify this probably as much as I should, but I essentially feel like I'm a pretty good person in that to the extent that I'm helpful, I try to be where possible. And hopefully that mindset pervades much of the advice that I provide and much of what I do. and hopefully in the advice that I give. And as that transmits throughout, I'm sure it'll probably make sense for me to write that down and make that kind of a big feature of what I do. In fact, it's a good idea. I'm gonna think about that and think about that as it relates to my little company.
Yeah. So what's something earlier in your life that you wish you had done that you've learned was probably important you did not do at the time?
I don't really live life regretting too much. The one thing I did was I chose back in law school. I had a fellowship to work at a foundation in Washington, a think tank. That was pretty interesting. And instead, I worked at Merrill Lynch's general counsel's office, which was a good experience too, and got me into New York, and that was great. But I really kind of wish I'd done the Washington route, the think tank route. That if I had to go back and rewrite something, that would probably be the big one. And the reason is that I think I'm, as it turns out, and you only learn these things by experience, but it turns out that I figured on pretty early on, this was between first and second year in law school, that I probably wasn't going to be a lawyer long term. And I think even back then I kind of knew it. And the think tank approach might have been a little bit different, and it's something that my brain really grooved on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If we can, I'd like to focus maybe on a few slightly more personal geared questions, if that's
Sure.
All right. What hurdles, especially when you were starting your practice, what hurdles did you and your family have to overcome during that time period?
Yeah, so I would say mostly the major hurdles for me personally is really dealing with self-belief and trying to feel like I was smart enough and helpful enough that the advice that I was providing was actually doing some good for some people. Once I started to see some tangible results on that front, then the idea was, how do I get more clients, and how do I go from being, let's call it an advisor, to someone who could develop business? And those are two different things. And I think I was inculcated with the idea that being a salesperson is bad. For one reason or another. And I've learned over the course of time that going out and getting new business for yourself or your firm is not bad. It's good. And
Sure.
the word sales is not necessarily a bad thing. And that's something that that was the big hurdle, was in my own mind. How do I take what's uniquely me and maybe my personality and make it something that is appealing to somebody else, that they're willing to pay for it, and to get over the fact that that's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something, likewise that I had seen is, that head trash, as I call it, getting over the self-damaging thoughts that come up, and the self-doubts that occur, and that might even be across many different industries, is that we have to see enough successes before we're able to say, okay, maybe I do have something of value here.
I think too, or along that same line, is you have to embrace the risk of being shut down or turned down. And I think the idea that if you get into a meeting and you have to really step up your game when you're feeling the adrenaline and it's either up or down is going to be the result, and feeling like whatever is uniquely you is going to win. I think that once you do that a couple of times, then it becomes, it's addictive, and you want to do it more and more. And I think that's
sure.
Something that a hurdle that I came across, and it's now turned into a bit more of a strength. So much so that I wrote a book and put that out there, which that's crazy to most people, but that was probably the natural extension of that.
Mm-hmm. So was it kind of obvious to you, the answer of how to overcome those hurdles, or did you sort of stumble upon those answers as time went on?
Well, I think the focus gets extremely clear as the hangman's noose comes closer. I think at some point you have to try certain things in order to make sure that you survive and that you do well in your business and so on. Mm-hmm. I think I thrive on the notion of being a little bit different. and hopefully being sort of different in terms of mindset. And once I got some positive feedback that was okay, and that uniqueness made it, that it was okay to do that, and that it could actually lead to some success, I think that's when the engine turns over and you're able to start going, and it starts to feel really good.
Mm-hmm. So when you started going from the legal world into the financial world, maybe talk me through how you made that transition, because that sounds like a pretty interesting shift.
Yeah, it was hard, and anytime you shift industries, it's hard. And by hard, I don't mean complicated, like you have to solve this big puzzle to do it. There's just a lot of persistence to it. So I'll just go into my legal background a little bit. I went to law school after some work in politics, and as I said before, I worked at Merrill Lynch's general counsel's office my first year, and then I worked for the SEC and an entertainment lawyer my second year, and then in House Banking Committee my second summer, and then the Federal Reserve my third year. And by the time the third year came around, I was in Atlanta. I went to Emory Law, and I liked Atlanta. I liked the people there, decent sort of cutting edge work. But I said, if this is as good as practicing law is going to get, it's not good enough for me. And but by that time, I'm through my third year in law school, and like, okay, what am I going to do here? So I passed the bar, got back up to New York. I practiced for my uncle's firm for a couple of years. His practice was lobbying and banking, and sort of I was able to get back to New York and get my feet wet up there. But in the meantime, I said I've got to do something different, and I didn't have any great notions of that, or I didn't have any specific clarity, but I wanted to do something that used my legal career, that got me out in front of people, and that took advantage of my interest in banking law and financial institutions and the wealth management business in general. I probably couldn't articulate it at the time. And I just talked to as many people as possible. A friend named Liz Peek once had some really good advice that she said, get in the way of as many people as possible, and you never know what's going to happen. And I did. I talked to as many people as I possibly could, and then I talked to someone named Tony Guernsey, who ran Wilmington Trust's New York office. He founded it off of the back of his Rolodex. He'd come from J.P. Morgan and UBS before that, and he said, I like the idea of lawyers as issue spotters, and you're confident in front of advisors and things like that. But he also said you had been practicing law so long that your answer to everything is no, or it depends. So I think we'll give you a chance here. And, Tony was probably number 100 of 120 people that I'd spoken to about different ideas and different concepts. I was thinking, I could be an investment banker or something, and talked to a lot of folks and had interviews. But he took a chance on me, and I ended up working for a managing director, helping to run the book of business. So I was able to learn in a fairly gentle environment how the business ran for a few years. She moved on to a different firm, and I was able to maintain the clients and then go out and find new ones. So my job there was to take care of what I had and go out and make it, bring more people in. And it was great. But it's that transition, I felt good about the education and about the experience that I had. I was moving into something different, not completely different, but definitely pivoting into something different. And I just had to swallow hard and do it. And it's when making a career transition, it's tough. But it was ultimately really rewarding, and it got me through 16 years at Wilmington, and with experiences and business acumen that I'll always be thankful for.
Very good. Excellent. So is there, other than what you're doing now, is there perhaps another profession that you've toyed with wanting to go into, in maybe a third direction at some point in life?
Sure. So, I'm dealing with a lot more sort of digital branding right now, and helping different clients and advisors help their digital presence. So I like that. I help out some clients on some personal wealth issues now too. One thing that I like to do on the side that I'm hopefully will turn into something someday I develop graphic novels, and I was the producer on a horror movie a couple of years ago. And I like to do a lot of different screenwriting types of projects. And that's something that, I'd love to have Michael Bay call up and say, geez, this is great. We'd be happy to buy your script for $100,000 or $200,000. And, they can say, hey, I'm Hollywood now. But that would be a lot of fun. But that's sort of that's a 1 in a million chance many times, but it's something that I like to do.
Sure.
And the graphic novel that I'm developing, I have a friend who is a co-writer, and we've done a lot of co-writing on different things, and we finally came across a concept that was terrific. And if we have a couple minutes, I'll just talk about kind of a cool thing about it. It's about 100 pages long, and we found the artist. We'd done another project with somebody, and the chief reason we took him is because he was good at drawing cats. And then, so we did a little 6-page thing with that. And then we had this 100-page component, and we engaged him with that. And we found him online. He's based in Bath, England. His name's Stephen Baskerville. He's fabulous. And it's amazing. I've never spoken to him on the phone. And we send him pages, and it just comes back borderline perfect. And I'm demanding and kind of a pain in the butt on this stuff. And it's just amazing. It is one of the neatest relationships I've ever had. And this thing's about 3/4 done. When it launches, it's going to be a really, really cool thing. And, I thought I was proud of myself for getting a book kicked out. But I'm going to be really happy when this comes out, because it's a neat intersection of fun storytelling, and to have it synthesized in an art form, and to have it turn out what I think is really well done. That's going to be a real joy. I enjoy that. So if I could somehow turn that into a full-time profession, that'd be great too. But for the meantime, it's one of my little side gigs that I enjoy pursuing, and it's keeps the brain going.
Well, we'll keep our eyes out for that novel to come out, and put our hands on it.
Terrific. It's called Stay Alive. So when it happens, I'll have a big showy opening. I'll make sure you're part of it, James.
Oh, excellent. Look forward to that. What would you say, Frazer, is would be your greatest strength?
Great. I'm going to say two good strengths. Strength one, I think, is I'm very good at staying in touch with people. And years go by with some folks, but where I don't see them, but I feel like I stay in pretty good touch with a lot of folks, and that's been helpful in keeping my network fairly robust. And that can be a nice thing as you're trying to develop business, or if you have to ask for something that's in a different part of the country or different part of the world. I have it's sort of a data bank of ideas and people and things that help get things done. And then I think the other strength is I think I'm comfortable in a lot of different situations. And I think that comes from the fact that I'm curious about where people come from and what they're up to. And I think that serves me in good stead, where, I can be as comfortable on a manufacturing floor as I am at a country club, as I am in a foreign country. Not much really bugs me, and I'm usually pretty interested in what I'm around. So I think people like that, and especially from an advisor standpoint, it helps me understand a little bit more. It helps me understand a little bit more about what they're doing, what their problems are.
And conversely, what would you say your greatest weakness would be then?
I would say I am probably more of a concept person than a detail person, and I fight that all the time. I do my best to make sure things are battened down, but my brain starts going really fast, and I'm on from one thing to the next. And so to the extent I can delegate out to people who help me with the details, that's when I'm set up best for success.
Yep.
And it's bad to admit that at a public forum, but it's true.
Well, I can certainly relate with that. The shiny object syndrome, can kick in, especially when your brain is racing at 100 miles an hour and you're working on a project, and all these other things around you seem to be sparkling at your periphery, and you're wanting to address those things too. So
that's right.
Right with that one. So at a very high level, for somebody that's wanting to get into the practice, how would you describe your day-to-day kind of on a high level?
Sure. So I think from a high level, my pie chart of time is sort of take care of the ones I have and go out and find new ones. So the take care of the ones I have part, I usually try to schedule a couple of hours a day to make sure that the trains are running on time, as we say, where people are, if money's moving around or people have questions about certain things, that I address that. Usually I have 1 or 2 hours a day scheduled to meet with people, and that's been scheduled over time to either review portfolios or deal with certain things. And then the second half is business development. And so that's everything from writing pieces to, conferences to being in touch with different law firms or centers of influence, that type of scenario where you're trying to get the word out and understand what people want, and at the same time let them know what you're capable of. So I would say at best it's 50% keeping your clients engaged and happy and making sure you're delivering on what you promised, and then the other 50% is trying to grow the business.
Yeah. Yeah, and having that structure, I think is very important. And you described your day in a very clear, concise manner, which is helpful for people so they can kind of break it up in that fashion. Because especially in our world, it's one of those that you do need to set out your day and your week, sort of that way, so that the 8 check boxes that you accomplish each day, if you can do those, then you've had a good day. And sort of keeping that in mind, not trying to save the world all in one day, because it's too much to bite off.
And I think too, for people who work at bigger institutions, and myself previously, it's important to understand that your job description and what you want to do align with what your bosses want you to do, because many times you get what I would describe as scope creep, where you get leaned on to maintain a service component that may not be in your best interest from the job description point of view, or maybe your ability to hit numbers and so on. So that pie chart of time can really come under attack, where if the job description is that you should be 90% business development and 10% relationship management, let's call it, and in fact the structure is in place where you actually have to spend 50% of your time on relationship management and 50% on business development, that's not going to set you up real well with your superiors long term. And when those things are out of alignment, that's when that's when it's not a great thing.
Yep. So for our final question here, what is something that most people don't know about you? Kind of a trivia question there.
What do most people don't know about me? I already gave it away that I like to write screenplays and graphic novels and so on and things like that. Let's see. Most people know that I really like to play golf, so that's not a secret either. I think most people may guess this, but wouldn't know that I had a radio show in high school and I had a TV show in college, and those are things that I enjoy as well. To go back to your previous question, what would you like to be going forward? I'd probably be decent as having a radio show. I've already got a podcast, so maybe I've already got that. But maybe I should be the next Charlie Rose or something like that.
Hey, excellent. So we'll watch out for that too. That'll be fun.
Terrific.
Well, Frazer, it's been enjoyable this morning to have you on the program, and as I always say, let's give a good way for people to reach out to you and make contact. So, what are your best contact methods?
Best way to get a hold of me is on wealthactually.com, wealthactually.com, or frazerrice.com, FRAZERRICE.com. The podcast is on Frazer Rice, and Wealth Actually talks about my business there. And there's a form to reach me on the Wealth Actually, so I can get back to people very quickly.
Excellent. So you heard it there, people. It's Frazer Rice today. And, Frazer, thank you for being on the program, and certainly look forward to seeing you around the bend there.
Thanks again. Thanks again, James.
All right. Thank you.